Henry Johnson was a man who had conquered the world. Owner of an incalculable fortune, he had turned failing businesses into profitable empires, always with a keen eye and a brilliant mind. But upon reaching middle age, Henry felt something his money couldn't resolve, a deep doubt about the love of his family. He wondered if they loved him for the man he was, or if they were only interested in his fortune. This thought consumed him during lonely nights in his vast mansion. Welcome to Heartwarming Tales. In this story, we will explore how money and power can reveal the true nature of people. I am Lucius, and I invite you to join me as we dive into an emotional and revealing narrative. One night, while gazing out the window of his office, a sense of emptiness overtook Henry. He recalled specific moments, how Margaret, his wife, seemed less engaged in intimate conversations, how his sons, John and Peter, were more interested in finances than in family dinners, and how Emily, the youngest daughter, was the only one who still maintained a genuine and affectionate relationship with him. Henry had everything, except the certainty that he was truly loved. How can a man have everything and yet feel so alone? At that moment, his phone rang. It was James Parker, his childhood friend and longtime confidant. "James, I'm at a point in my life where I no longer know who really cares about me," Henry said, his voice heavy with anguish. James, always the attentive listener, sensed the seriousness of the situation. "Henry, maybe it's time for you to find out, and I'm here to help you, whatever you need." Henry's conversation with James planted an idea in his mind, risky but necessary. The next day, they met at a discreet restaurant, away from the prying eyes of the media and acquaintances. "James, I want to pretend that I have a serious degenerative illness, something that will prevent me from walking, that will make me dependent. I want to see who is truly by my side," Henry explained, with a determination that even surprised his friend. James, a respected doctor, hesitated for a moment, but knowing Henry since childhood, he knew that once Henry made a decision, there was no changing his mind. "It's a huge responsibility, Henry, but if this is what you really want, I'll help you make it look real." From that moment on, Henry began to implement his plan. First, he started to act more reserved, claiming fatigue during family dinners and avoiding activities that had once been part of his daily routine. He began to feign difficulty moving, showing weakness when getting up and walking. Margaret, his wife, initially concerned, started to notice that Henry was becoming increasingly distant. "Henry, are you okay? You seem so tired lately," she asked, touching his shoulder with a tenderness that was beginning to turn into genuine concern. "It's just stress, dear. Nothing to worry about," Henry would reply, while a shadow of doubt started to form in his mind about the authenticity of Margaret's care. A few weeks later, Henry made his first visit to James's office, where the diagnosis of a progressive neurological disease was confirmed. The following Sunday, during the family dinner, Henry announced the news with a heavy and resigned voice. "It seems my body is failing me," he said, looking directly into the eyes of each family member. The reaction was immediate. Margaret brought her hand to her mouth, shocked and speechless. John and Peter, however, exchanged quick glances, as if they were already contemplating what this would mean for the future of the company and the inheritance. Emily, the youngest daughter, was the only one who immediately rushed to her father's side, holding his hand tightly, not hiding the tears streaming down her face. In the following days, Henry began using a wheelchair, symbolizing the rapid progression of his fictitious illness. He avoided moving around the house and increasingly depended on others to perform even the simplest tasks. At first, the whole family seemed concerned, but soon the true intentions began to surface. Margaret, who initially was always by Henry's side, started showing signs of frustration. She still took care of him, but with diminishing patience. John and Peter, who were always present at the beginning, began to distance themselves, claiming they were busy with business, but Henry knew the reality was different. They were more concerned with ensuring that the company continued to prosper to secure their future fortunes. Henry, observing everything with keen eyes, began to realize that his worst suspicions might be coming true. What was initially a simple doubt was now taking root deeply in his mind, growing into an uncomfortable certainty. He knew that the answer he was seeking would be painful, perhaps more painful than he ever imagined, but he was determined to follow through with the plan until the end. With James's help, Henry was preparing for the harsh truths that were starting to emerge, truths that could forever change the course of his life and his family's. But what would he discover next? Could he handle the devastating reality that awaited him, or would this test of loyalty shatter the very foundation of his world? Stay with us as the story unfolds, revealing the deep secrets that could tear a family apart or bring them together in ways they never expected. The answers are closer than ever, but are they ready for what's about to be uncovered? Don't miss the next chapter in this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and the pursuit of truth. As Henry Johnson's supposed illness progressed, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change noticeably. The place that was once filled with life and laughter was now shrouded in an uncomfortable silence. The hallways, which had once echoed with Henry's confident footsteps and the lively conversations of the family, now seemed longer and colder, as if the vital energy that Henry had always brought into the home was slowly fading away. The grand living room, which used to be the heart of the house where the family gathered to share stories and laughter, had now turned into a desolate space. The curtains, once letting in the sunlight, now remained closed, muffling the brightness and plunging the house into a constant twilight. The diagnosis of Henry's illness was initially a shock to everyone, but as time passed, the routine of constant care lost its impact, revealing the true colors of each family member. Margaret was the first to show genuine concern. In the days and weeks following the diagnosis, she devoted herself to caring for Henry with a tenderness and attention that reflected the love they had shared over the years. She made sure to prepare his favorite meals, paying attention to every detail. When Henry had difficulty eating, Margaret patiently helped him, holding his trembling hand and whispering words of comfort. But as the months went by, the weight of responsibility began to manifest in Margaret in a subtle yet inevitable way. Each day, she felt the pressure mounting, as if she were being slowly crushed by the burden of caring for a man who seemed to be deteriorating before her eyes. The sparkle in her eyes began to fade, replaced by an expression of constant exhaustion. She started delegating more and more of her responsibilities to the servants, justifying that she needed time for herself, but in reality, she felt increasingly trapped. Henry, always observant, noticed these changes. He could see how Margaret's once gentle gestures had become automatic, mechanical, as if she were simply fulfilling an obligation. One day, during dinner, Henry tried to start a conversation about old memories, something that always made them smile, but Margaret only responded with a vacant nod, barely registering his words. Then came the night that marked a turning point. While Henry was alone in his wheelchair, in the oppressive silence of the room, he overheard Margaret talking on the phone. Her voice, which had once been warm and comforting, was now cold and distant. "I just can't take it anymore. He's not the man he used to be. I feel like I'm drowning here." Those words cut Henry deeply. He knew his illness was a ruse, but the emotional pain he felt at that moment was undeniably real. He wondered if the Margaret he knew and loved had disappeared forever, or if there was still a chance to reconnect with her. John and Peter, his eldest sons, had always been ambitious, and Henry, in his youth, had been proud of that ambition. They were seen as the natural heirs to the family business, and Henry believed he was preparing them for a successful future. However, with Henry's illness, that ambition began to warp. Visits to the mansion, which had once been frequent and filled with discussions about the future of the company, became increasingly rare. John and Peter always had a ready excuse. They were working hard to keep the company on track during this difficult time. But Henry knew the truth was different. They were more concerned with consolidating their power than with maintaining the integrity of the family business. John, the eldest, began to take over the company's leadership in an increasingly authoritarian manner. He ignored the advice of experienced executives, convinced that he knew what was best. On one of his visits to the company, Henry heard reports from loyal employees about how John was risking the company's capital on risky and unorthodox investments. John seemed more interested in building his own legacy than in preserving what his father had worked so hard to build. Peter, on the other hand, took a different approach. He began withdrawing significant amounts of money from the company under the pretext of investment diversification. In reality, Peter was accumulating funds in personal accounts, preparing for the worst-case scenario. When Henry discovered this, he felt a deep sense of disgust. He had always believed he had raised his sons with solid values, but now he saw how greed was consuming them. Once, while John and Peter were at the mansion for a rare visit, Henry, in an effort to test their true feelings, casually mentioned that he was worried about the company's future. "Don't worry, Dad," John replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're taking care of everything." But John's words rang hollow to Henry. He knew his sons were more concerned with control than with the well-being of the company or their father. As Margaret, John, and Peter distanced themselves, Emily, the youngest daughter, remained a beacon of hope for Henry. Since childhood, Emily had always been the most loving and compassionate of the children, and now, in the face of her father's supposed illness, these qualities shone even more brightly. Emily spent hours by Henry's side, reading to him, chatting about trivial matters to distract him from the pain she believed he was feeling. She helped him with patience and affection, never showing any signs of fatigue or frustration. For Emily, caring for her father wasn't a burden but an opportunity to repay all the love he had given her over the years. One night, while Emily was helping him to bed, Henry looked into his daughter's eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. True love, with no ulterior motives. She smiled at him, a smile full of tenderness, and whispered, "I know you must be suffering, Daddy, but I'm here with you. I always will be." Those words were like a balm to Henry's heart. He knew that, regardless of what happened with the rest of the family, Emily would be the light that guided him. However, this thought also brought deep pain, as Henry felt guilty for involving Emily in his ruse. He wondered how she would react when she discovered the truth. With John and Peter taking control, the family company began to suffer the consequences of their reckless decisions. What had once been a solid empire began to show signs of fragility. Henry heard reports from Emily about the problems at the company, and each new piece of information was like a blow to him. The employees, who had always respected Henry, were now demotivated and uncertain about the future. Once, Emily brought an anonymous letter from one of the company's employees. The content was alarming. "Things aren't going well at the company. We need your leadership." As Henry read the letter, he felt a wave of despair. His supposed illness prevented him from acting directly, from taking control of the situation. But more than that, he saw that John and Peter were failing, and that their greed and negligence were about to destroy everything he had worked for. As the months turned into a heavy burden, the tension in the Johnson family reached a breaking point. Margaret, increasingly absent, began spending more time away from home, claiming that she needed time for herself. She frequented social clubs, dinners with friends, desperately seeking to escape the suffocating reality of her home. John and Peter were immersed in their own agendas, concerned with maintaining their control over the company and securing their future inheritances. Emily, despite her tireless dedication to her father, began to feel the weight of the burden she carried alone. She tried to balance caring for Henry and her own responsibilities, but the loneliness began to eat away at her. On several occasions, she thought about talking to her mother or brothers about the situation, but she always hesitated, fearing they wouldn't take her seriously or, worse, ignore her completely. One night, during a family dinner, the tension finally came to a head. The table was silent, with only the sound of cutlery hitting the plates. Margaret, exhausted and visibly irritated, let slip. "I can't live like this anymore. Henry, it's killing me." John, always opportunistic, seized the moment of his mother's weakness to suggest that perhaps it was time to think about the future and delegate the company's responsibilities to him and Peter. "You know, Dad, no one knows how much time you have left. We need to make sure the company keeps thriving." Emily, shocked and disgusted by her brother's insensitivity, abruptly stood up from the table, tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't bear the thought that her brothers were so focused on power and control that they couldn't see their father's suffering. Henry, who had remained silent until then, felt the weight of his decision to fake the illness. He realized that the plan, although necessary to reveal his family's true nature, was tearing it apart from the inside out. The weight of neglect and indifference from his family had become unbearable for Henry Johnson. Each day in his imposing mansion only reinforced the bitter reality that, to his wife Margaret and his sons John and Peter, he was nothing more than a shadow of his former self, a figure that no longer served any purpose beyond the material. Only Emily, his youngest daughter, remained by his side, faithful and dedicated. But even she was beginning to feel the burden of carrying the care for her father alone. One morning, after a sleepless night, Henry looked at Emily, who was watching him with concern and tenderness. He knew it was time to leave that suffocating environment. "Emily," he said with a trembling voice, "we need to go to Willow Creek." Willow Creek, the family's country house, was a special place for Henry. Located in a small village, far from the urban chaos and surrounded by the tranquility of nature, the place had been a refuge for him in times of stress. There, he had always found peace and clarity. It was a place where memories of happy times still remained intact, far from the disputes and ambitions that now tainted his life at home. Emily immediately understood her father's desire. Without hesitation, began organizing the trip. The journey to Willow Creek was peaceful, yet laden with a sense of anticipation. Henry looked out the car window, watching the trees pass by quickly, their leaves swaying in the wind as if waving goodbye to a turbulent past. He wondered if he would find the peace he so desired, or if the shadows of abandonment and indifference would follow him there. When they arrived at Willow Creek, Henry felt a wave of relief. The country house was situated amid rolling green hills, surrounded by fields of wildflowers and a crystal-clear stream that flowed gently nearby. The air was fresh and pure, unlike the heavy and suffocating atmosphere of the mansion. Emily helped Henry out of the car and into the house, which still retained the warmth and simplicity of a genuine home. In the first days, Henry devoted himself to absorbing the tranquility of the place. He spent the mornings sitting in his wheelchair on the porch, watching the stream that reflected the blue sky and the birds that flew carefree. The sound of the flowing water was like a gentle melody, and Henry felt that, for the first time in a long while, he could breathe freely. Emily accompanied him, reading books, discussing the stories he liked, and sometimes simply sitting beside him in silence, sharing the peace of the moment. At night, the sky at Willow Creek was a spectacle in itself. Without the city lights to dim it, the stars shone brightly, scattered like diamonds on a black tapestry. Henry found himself gazing at the sky, lost in thought, wondering if there was a way back for his family, or if the scars left by their indifference would be permanent. Willow Creek was more than just a natural refuge. It was also home to simple and kind people who lived in harmony with the land. Among them was the local healer, a wise man named Samuel. Samuel was known for his ability to treat ailments with herbs and natural remedies, but he was also respected for his wisdom and insights about life. One day, while Emily was in the village buying supplies, Henry asked to see Samuel. When the healer arrived, with his calm demeanor and perceptive gaze, Henry felt it was the moment to share his secret. He invited him to sit beside him on the porch, where the gentle breeze caressed their faces and the sound of the stream created an atmosphere of serenity. "Samuel," Henry began, his voice heavy with guilt and sadness, "there's something I need to confess. My illness, it's not real." Samuel remained silent for a moment, simply observing Henry. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep understanding. "Tell me, Henry," he said softly, "why did you do this?" Henry sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his actions. "I wanted to know who truly cared about me, who in my family loved me for who I am, and not for what I have. I thought pretending to have this illness would reveal the truth, and it did, but what I discovered hurt me deeply." Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing Henry's words. "And what did you discover?" he asked. Henry felt a lump in his throat as he thought of his wife and sons. Margaret, John, and Peter. They left me behind, concerned only with the inheritance and control of the company. They saw me only as a burden. But Emily was the only one who stayed. She never complained, never pulled away. I never wanted to involve her in this plan, but now she's the only reason I'm still here. Samuel reflected for a moment before responding. "Henry, what you discovered may have been painful, but it was also necessary. The truth, no matter how cruel, frees us from the illusions we carry. Now you know who is truly by your side." After the confession, Henry began to reflect more deeply on everything that had happened. He remembered the moments when Margaret looked at him with frustration, the calculated smiles of John and Peter when they talked about the future of the company, and the pain he felt knowing that they didn't care about his well-being. Henry realized that Margaret's indifference was perhaps the most painful of all. She had been his companion for so many years, the woman with whom he had shared dreams, hopes, and fears. Watching that relationship disintegrate before his eyes, and realizing that the love between them had turned into something cold and distant, was a devastating blow. On the other hand, he also reflected on Emily and her pure heart. Every act of kindness from her, every word of comfort, was a reminder to him that not everything was lost. Emily represented unconditional love, something Henry was beginning to value more than any material wealth. That night, after the sun had set and the moon began to shine over Willow Creek, Samuel returned to Henry's house. He brought with him a special tea, made from herbs he had personally gathered. "This will help you rest better," Samuel said, but Henry knew the healer had something more in mind. "Samuel," Henry said as he held the warm cup of tea, "what should I do now? How can I move forward after all this?" Samuel looked deeply into Henry's eyes, and for a moment, it seemed as if time had stopped. "Henry," he began, "what you did was motivated by pain and the need for truth. But now that you know this truth, you need to find peace within yourself. It's not easy to forgive, especially when what was revealed is so painful. But if you don't forgive, this burden will consume your soul." Samuel's words touched something deep inside Henry. He knew the healer was right. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting or ignoring what happened, but rather freeing himself from the poison that indifference had injected into his heart. Henry Johnson spent weeks in Willow Creek, mentally preparing for the inevitable confrontation with his family. The peace and serenity he found with Emily and Samuel were essential in helping him face the painful truth that awaited him at home. But now, the time for reflection was over. It was time to return to the city, to the mansion where so many truths had been revealed, and deal with the consequences of his deception. The journey back was silent. Emily drove with a tense expression, aware that her father was about to face the most difficult moment of his life. Henry, sitting beside her, gazed out the window, watching the familiar landscape draw closer. The sky was cloudy, reflecting the emotional storm brewing within him. He knew that what was to come would forever change the dynamics of his family. When they arrived at the mansion, Henry felt a chill run down his spine. The place he once called home now seemed dark and hostile. He knew that his family's betrayal could not go unpunished, but the decision to sever ties with those he loved was not one he took lightly. As soon as he entered the mansion, Henry asked everyone to gather in the living room. Margaret was the first to come down the stairs, with a confused and worried expression. John and Peter arrived shortly after, both with looks of suspicion. Emily, always by her father's side, stayed slightly behind, watching with apprehension what was about to happen. "Henry, what's going on?" Margaret asked, trying to hide the unease in her voice. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't foresee the gravity of the situation. Henry stared at her with a piercing gaze that made Margaret feel a chill. "I know everything, Margaret," he began, his voice firm but laden with pain. "I know about your betrayal, about the man you were with while I was here, pretending to be on the brink of death." Margaret turned pale, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. Henry's words hit her like a punch to the gut. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Tears began to roll down her face as she stammered, "Henry, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Henry interrupted, his voice now cold. "While I was here, trying to find out who really cared about me, you were busy betraying me, destroying what was left of our marriage. For years, we built a life together, and now, everything has fallen apart because of your choices." Margaret fell to her knees, sobbing desperately. "I made a mistake, Henry. Please forgive me." Her voice was full of desperation, but also a silent resignation, as if she knew there was no turning back. But Henry didn't relent. He knew he couldn't give in. "You have 1 week to leave this house," he declared. "I want you out of my life. Our ties are cut, Margaret. There's nothing left between us." Margaret continued to cry, but Henry looked away, his heart heavy but resolute in his decision. He knew that this decision, as painful as it was necessary for him to move forward. Henry then turned to John and Peter, who had been watching in silence, clearly uncomfortable. They had been caught off guard by the confrontation with Margaret, but they knew something was about to happen to them as well. "You two," Henry began, looking directly at his sons. "Do you think I didn't know what you were doing? Do you think I didn't notice your greed, your lies, and how willing you were to sacrifice my company for your own interests?" John tried to intervene, his voice trembling. "Dad, we just wanted to take care of the business while you were sick. We did what we thought was best." "What you thought was best?" Henry interrupted, his tone full of disdain. "You put everything I built at risk. You only cared about power, about money, never about what was right, never about the legacy I was trying to leave for you." Peter, always the more reserved one, tried to argue, his voice low and hesitant. "Dad, please, we were trying. We didn't know that." "Didn't know? Or simply didn't care?" Henry shot back. "I watched you, saw how you neglected everything in favor of your selfish ambitions. You are not worthy of continuing what I built." The two remained silent, unable to find words to defend themselves. They knew any argument would be futile. "I've decided that you will have no part in my inheritance," Henry announced, his voice firm and without hesitation. "Emily will be the sole heir to my fortune and my company. You have lost the right to call this your own." The news hit John and Peter like a bomb. They were paralyzed, unable to process what they had just heard. "Dad, you can't do this," John murmured, his voice almost inaudible. "I can, and I will," Henry replied, unyielding. "You showed who you truly are, and I cannot let people like you destroy what I've spent my entire life building." Peter, in one last desperate effort, approached Henry, his face full of despair. "Dad, please, we can change. Give us a chance to prove we're worthy. We made mistakes, but we can fix them." Henry looked at Peter, seeing the fear and pleading in his son's eyes. For a brief moment, he considered giving them a second chance, but then, the memory of their past actions, of the destruction they almost caused, made him shake his head. "There are no more chances," Henry said, his voice firm. "I already gave you everything you could wish for, and you squandered it. Now, it's too late." Emily, who had watched everything in silence, now felt overwhelmed by the weight of the responsibility her father had just placed on her shoulders. She always knew her father trusted her, but she never imagined she would be the only one to carry on his legacy. "Dad," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm ready to take on everything by myself." Henry approached Emily and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Emily. You have me, and you always will. But you are the only one who has shown that you understand the true value of what we've built together. You are the only one who still has the heart and morals to guide this family and this company into the future." Emily felt tears begin to well up in her eyes, but she knew she had to be strong. She looked at her father and, with newfound determination, said, "I'll do it for you, Dad. I'll honor your legacy and make sure everything you built continues the right way." As Henry looked at his daughter, feeling the weight of both grief and relief, he knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The final confrontation may have brought clarity, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Could Emily truly carry the Johnson name forward with honor and integrity? Would the wounds of betrayal ever fully heal? And what challenges still lay ahead as they attempted to rebuild what had been destroyed? Stay with us as we continue this journey of redemption, love, and fighting for what truly matters. The story of Henry Johnson and his family is not over yet. Don't miss what happens next. After the devastating confrontation, Henry Johnson's mansion was enveloped in a heavy silence. The words spoken in the heat of the moment still reverberated through the halls, and each family member retreated to their own space, lost in thought. Henry, however, felt a different kind of exhaustion. It wasn't just physical, but also spiritual. The emotional burden of the day had left a deep mark on his heart. As he prepared for bed, Henry reflected on everything that had happened. He had made difficult decisions, severed ties that he believed were irreparable, and now he was alone in his bed, trying to find peace amidst the whirlwind of emotions. He knew he had done what he believed was right, but there was still a weight on his heart, a restlessness he couldn't ignore. Finally, exhausted, Henry closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. But that night, his rest would not be peaceful. Henry found himself in a vast green field, where the air was fresh and the sky shone with a warm golden light. The field seemed infinite, surrounded by majestic mountains that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. The gentle wind swayed the leaves of nearby trees, creating a natural melody that soothed Henry's heart. He felt an immediate peace, as if all the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. In the distance, he saw a figure walking toward him. As the figure approached, Henry realized it was Jesus, with a serene and loving expression, radiating a soft light that seemed to calm all of Henry's worries. Jesus was dressed in a white robe that shone like snow in the sun, and his eyes reflected infinite compassion. When Jesus stopped before him, Henry felt a mix of humility and reverence. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jesus raised his hand, indicating that he should listen first. "Henry," Jesus said in a voice that seemed to echo through Henry's very soul, "you have been through a great test. The pain of betrayal and abandonment is difficult to bear, and your decisions were made with a wounded heart. But I am here to show you the path of forgiveness." Henry looked at Jesus, confused and still feeling the pain of his family's actions. "But how can I forgive them, Lord? They destroyed my trust, almost destroyed everything I built. How can I just forget that?" Jesus smiled, and the light around him seemed to shine even more intensely. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Henry. It's about freeing your heart from the bitterness that corrodes it. It's an act of grace that you offer, not just to them, but to yourself as well. Remember what I said in Matthew 6 verses 14 to 15. For if you forgive others when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. You have the power to heal your family, to restore what was broken, but it can only begin with forgiveness." Henry felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He knew Jesus' words were true, but the fear and pain were still deeply rooted. "What if they betray me again?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jesus stepped closer and placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. "Forgiveness doesn't guarantee that they won't err again, but it guarantees that you won't carry the weight of distrust and pain. Trust me, Henry, forgive them, and you will see how love can transform what seems lost." Henry woke up abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could still hear the echo of Jesus' words in his mind and knew he had received divine guidance. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he reflected on what the dream really meant. The idea of forgiving Margaret, John, and Peter initially seemed impossible, but he realized that it was exactly what he needed to do to find peace. He sat in silence for a moment, still processing the depth of the message he had received. Jesus' words echoed in his mind, bringing a new understanding of what it truly meant to forgive. It wasn't just an act of redemption for others, but also for himself. It was the key to the healing he so desperately sought. The next morning, Henry gathered his family in the living room. Margaret looked visibly worn, with dark circles under her eyes and a sad expression. John and Peter seemed exhausted, their faces marked by the tension of the past hours. Emily stood by her father's side, worried but confident that he was about to make an important decision. "I had a dream," Henry began, his voice soft but laden with emotion. "A dream that showed me the power of forgiveness. I saw Jesus, and he taught me that forgiveness is the key to healing our wounds and rebuilding what was destroyed." Margaret looked at him, incredulous but with a spark of hope in her eyes. John and Peter exchanged nervous glances, still uncertain of what this meant for them. "I have decided to forgive all of you," Henry continued, his eyes fixed on each family member. "Margaret, John, Peter, I forgive you for everything you did. I know I was wrong to pretend to be ill, but I did it because I needed to know the truth. Now, the truth has been revealed, and with it comes the opportunity to start over." Tears began to roll down Margaret's face again, but this time, there was a glimmer of hope mixed with regret. "Henry, I don't know how to thank you. I promise I will change, that I will be the wife you deserve." John and Peter were speechless, shocked by the compassion their father was showing. "Dad," John finally said, breaking the silence, "we were wrong too. We lost sight of what really matters. Please, give us a chance to prove we can be different." Henry nodded, feeling the warmth of forgiveness soften the hard edges of his pain. "You will have that chance. I will reverse my decision to disinherit you. You will have a share in the inheritance, but with that comes the responsibility to prove you have learned from your mistakes. I don't just want heirs. I want a family that works together with love and respect." Margaret approached Henry, tears still streaming, but with a new look of determination in her eyes. "Thank you, Henry. I promise we will get through this together." She embraced him, and for the first time in months, Henry felt the weight on his heart beginning to lift. John and Peter, still shocked by their father's sudden change, approached and hugged Henry as well, each murmuring words of gratitude and promises to change. Emily watched the scene with an emotional smile. She knew that the road to the family's healing would still be long, but she was confident that they were on the right path. Henry's forgiveness had opened a door that had once seemed closed forever, and now it was time to walk through it together. With forgiveness guiding their actions, the Johnson family began to rebuild their lives and the company with a new sense of purpose and love. Henry, Margaret, John, Peter, and Emily worked together, each striving to heal the wounds of the past and create a future where love and unity were the foundations of everything they did. The company, which had once seemed destined for failure, began to flourish again under Henry's renewed leadership, who now saw in his children the desire to learn and grow. Margaret and Henry, though still bearing the scars of betrayal and regret, found a new way to love and support each other. Henry's dream of Jesus was not just a vision, but a beacon that guided them back to what truly mattered: forgiveness, family, and unconditional love. And so, united and strengthened, the Johnsons faced the future together, with renewed hearts and a new hope. Gancho para o próximo video e call to action. Thank you for following this emotional story to the end. Have you ever experienced forgiveness in your life? Share your story with us in the comments. We would love to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories from Heartwarming Tales. Stay tuned for more heart-touching stories that inspire the soul.